Hello and welcome. So this is the second of 3 parts in this series, this more than merely coping series. I will just say now that we're recording, if you are watching this on later on YouTube, then and you'd like to get in touch or ask some questions or get some information about how to put this stuff into practice, then there's some information in the comments below. So you can just go there and feel free to get in touch. And for those of you who did watch the first part, as I mentioned already, I think 50 people had watched it when I woke up this morning. So please, if you have questions about it or objections of any kind, just get in touch and let me know what you're thinking soon, because I'll be away between Christmas and New Year's where I won't have any email. Okay. So then, let's get started, shall we? Okay. Yesterday, we started this whole thing by looking at types of happiness, if you like. I'm presenting genuine happiness. I'm presenting that as a direct antidote to stress. And in order to get good at that, and firstly, we have to think of that as being a skill you can learn, something you can train in. And then you need to know how to do that, right? Need to know what are the causes, what do I need to sort of cultivate or put in place? What are the obstacles? What are the sort of things I need to eliminate or get rid of in order to hit this genuine happiness idea, right? And it really is kind of a bit of a, what's the word? I don't want to say cure-all, but it really is a really direct antidote to all types of stress. So there you have that. Some of the things, the obstacles that get in our way are not understanding happiness, mistaking one type for another. We looked at that yesterday. Also, regret and guilt, which we'll look at today, and compassion and empathy. So that's where we're at. Today, in some ways, might seem a little more technical than other things. So I haven't put a lot of slides together, and I'm just going to go through it slowly. And you can ask me any questions that might come up. Okay. So let me get started. Here we are. Okay. So then, I already mentioned that there's some few components to this. I will start off a similar way than yesterday, just to really encourage you to think about this as a luxury, like not as time you've kind of put aside to something you feel you have to do or need to do, but actually that you have the luxury just to spend a little bit of time, maybe an hour or so, just on learning some things about yourself that hopefully will help you in your life. So ideally, you would be able to silence your phone, leave it in another room. I highly recommend doing that sort of thing. Leaving it in other people's houses even is quite good for your mental health, but that's time for another session. Close the other tabs and windows. Anyway, it's your time, so let's make the most of it. I make the same kind of like promise, or at least my motivation behind this is that I'm hoping that you will know how you can interrupt some underlying causes of stress. I'm just going to say this again, and I know you've heard it before, many of you, but that we often just talk about stress. How do I overcome stress? And stress is like a conglomerate of all sorts of things that are different for everyone. In fact, they're different from you today than they were yesterday, and certainly than they were a week ago. There are some main components that are the same, but different things are coming up that are causing you this stress. And as long as we just react to stress, oh yeah, I'm stressed, what do I do? I need to, go to the fridge, go to the shop, get to the beach, get out into the forest, go meet my friends, see a movie, these sorts of things, then you're never actually going to be free of it. And you're certainly never going to be able to use stress to your advantage, which is entirely possible, because you aren't looking at the causes. And so what I'm interested in here are some of the really root causes of stress. So rather than talking about what to do about stress, I'm interested in what to do about the causes. Okay, which I'm in the middle of a PhD on stress. I've been around the block a few times, and I know that people aren't really talking about this very much, although some quite awesome people are, but that's, again, another time. So we're going to start pulling stress out from the root. Here we go. I'll ask a similar question as I did yesterday morning. Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly reliving a past event, where maybe you said or did something that you wish you hadn't? I just want to make sure we're all working here. Give me a yes or a no in the chat box, please. Then I know. I think I probably know the answer, but it's helpful for me just to have to make sure that we're all okay. Okay, thank you. Yep, good. How about these sorts of things? Maybe done that repeatedly, or excuse me, or maybe repeatedly, or maybe in the course of all this really started to feel like, what's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me that this is happening. Just because of something that you've maybe said or done. And maybe even this one, which is a big one I hear a lot, wondered why you can't just, let it go or move on. In fact, maybe you've even talked to people, professionals even, but maybe just friends who say, just let it go, move on, which, frankly is, I don't know, it's good advice in as much as letting it go, but it's completely unhelpful thing to say to somebody because you don't know how to let it go. And so often I have, clients or people I work with, and they, in say the course of a meditation session or something, they'll call me up or email me and say, I had this thing that's been bothering me, and I really felt that I let it go. And they're really happy because they think it's gone forever, but it's not. What they will have likely done is had a moment to be free of it thanks to the work they're doing. But then, of course, some moment later, they're just it's going to come back unless we do the work. So letting it go and moving on is much, much harder. It's much easier said than done. Okay, so we're going to look at that today. Of course, if any of those you do fall into the category of any of those, is really not your fault. We're not taught how to deal with this kind of thing. We're not taught even how stress works, as I mentioned yesterday. So let's have a look. And just like yesterday, I'm looking, what I want to see is people learn well-being as a skill, right? I want to see people wake up in the morning confident you can handle what's coming. Not that you know what's coming or that it's going to be easy, but just confident you'll get through whatever's coming. And of course, feeling good that you've handled things well at the end of a day or at the end of a week or whatever. And ideally, when you do get your act together like this, then you're really in a position to start to support your colleagues, family members, friends, whoever, which is, a great feeling. So it's all something that you can achieve if you do the work, right? And firstly, if you understand how it all works, and then doing the work isn't so hard because you already know how it works and what has to be done. It's just a matter of doing it. Okay, this slide snuck in. If you saw the thing yesterday, you know who I am. I did some stuff, and there it goes. Let's get back to this. Yeah, I mentioned yesterday, same sorts of thing. So I just want to hammer this home again, because it's not an approach that is used all that often. Two ways of dealing with stress: drowning it out or figuring it out. Okay, drowning it out, people often talk about distracting yourself. I have real issues with that. Some of you know. There are healthy ways of drowning it out and not so healthy ways of drowning it out. But either way, what the flaw in this approach is that you'll just constantly need more and more and more, right? As time goes on, you need more of whatever you're doing, drugs, alcohol, exercise, it doesn't matter. You'll need more of it as the stress kind of just backs up and comes at you stronger. Then, of course, there is the figuring it out idea, which is understanding how stress works, right? Using techniques to get it on your side, ideally, which is where you're really, really thriving, because stress has an evolutionary benefit. If there was no benefit to stress. Evolution would have kind of whittled it out over the generations, but it hasn't. So it's a matter of using it as on your side. And of course, it basically comes down to escapism versus tackling something head on. And there's a time for both, in my opinion, right? So here they are, the 3 big causes of stress. And yesterday we had a look at this, types of happiness. If you haven't seen that video, go back and watch it if you have the time. And today we're going to look at this, guilt and regret. Okay. So, Vestla's saying, recall, yeah. It's hard. This idea of letting things go and how is kind of tied up on how you feel about it. Claire's saying she used IFS. I actually don't know what they are, what IFS is. But of course, you'll know if you've let things go because they won't ever bother you again, right? In the meantime, what people do is they make really serious strides in getting away from things that are bothering them, like a temporary release. And this is a really, really big deal. But clearly, if it comes back and bothers you within the next week or month or year, then you haven't let it go. But that's okay. That's really not an issue. Very few of us ever let anything completely go, because at some point we randomly remember all sorts of stuff. And there's quite interesting research into that. Okay, so let's have a look. The type of guilt we're talking about here is not court of law, did he or she do it or not. We're talking more about a kind of sense that you're somehow a bad person because of something you've said or done. Okay, I'm really big on defining my terminology, because it's not saying that I'm right about this, just that when I'm talking about it, we need a sort of a place to discuss. We need to be able to discuss what's going on using shared terminology. And there's a serious lack of that in psychology these days, to be honest, and a lot of other series. So I make sure that my terminology is clear. So there it is. Sometimes people call it I'm hesitant to use this, but a Judeo-Christian sense of guilt. That really resonates with me because I grew up in that culture, and so I understand it, but I don't want to upset anyone unless I guess it's too late. Versus regret. And so regret is it's a type of sadness or sorrow about something that you wish hadn't happened. Okay, this is what we're talking about here. And I'm going to present a case, if you like, that the first one, guilt, is mostly problematic. There's very little upside, if any, to that. Whereas regret can go either way, but regret is a really useful tool if you use it correctly to get free of these sort of intrusive thoughts and memories and things that that bug us, and they bug us all, of course, to varying degrees. Okay, so we're going to start with this sense with guilt. We're going to have a look at this, and one of the reasons this happens, there's a mechanism behind people feeling like there's something, like if I feel like I'm a bad person, there's something wrong with me because I said or did something. And what we often do is we consider our actions, and not just ours, actions of others. We consider our own actions as being us. When you see someone behaving badly, we think, oh, it's a bad person, not a person behaving badly. And it's really, really important to figure this out, right? Because a person engaging in bad actions, negative actions, is not necessarily a bad person. If we had more time, and some of you know, when I have more time with people, I work with clients. In fact, I argue there are no bad people, right? But there are pretty awful things that people do, but the person themselves isn't bad. So why this becomes important is because in terms of guilt, you need to first understand that you are not your actions. It's also helpful to understand other people aren't their actions, but here we go. Actions have causes, they have motivations. And okay, so while I'm hitting you with some fundamental ideas, I'll hit you with another one that we're going to revisit in the next hour or so, is that basically actions have causes and they have motivations behind them. And I can tell you the motivation of every action that every human being, at least, that every human being has ever been, every motivation that every human being has ever had for any action, and that is to be happier, to avoid difficulties and suffering, fundamentally, right? Whether it's, grabbing a chocolate out of the fridge or undergoing surgery, that fundamentally the purpose is about avoiding difficulties and or being happy. It's that simple. The issue, as we looked yesterday, is that we don't often really understand happiness very well, and we often mistake different types of happiness and get it all confused. Okay, so there it is. And so this idea of you not being your actions, right, so is quite easy to demonstrate. For example, there is you and there are your actions. So like, it's that simple. A person and the actions that belong to the person. You could say a child and the child's behavior, if you like. A person and the person's thoughts, emotions, desires, because your thoughts, ideas, opinions, desires are also not you, right? And the cool thing about this is that the apostrophe basically does it for you, right? Once you say it's the person's actions, you have a person and you have their action, and they're two separate things, and it's actually finished. You can't possibly say that a person is their actions, right? How it doesn't make sense. You can't. So this is really helpful, right? Because, and here's how it works. I often use the tantruming child sort of example, because when you have, if you're confronted, if you like, or you encounter, perhaps a better word, if you encounter a child throwing a tantrum, what we tend to think is, oh, what a bad child, a naughty child. We attribute the child with these qualities, when what's actually happening is you have a child who is engaging in some type of behavior, right, that I find unpleasant. Probably everyone does. I'm sure there's an evolutionary reason why it's so unpleasant. So they're engaging in this behavior. I find it unpleasant. And in that sense of displeasure of my own, that negative affect, we would call it, unpleasant experience, is something that I kind of attribute to the child as a quality of the child. I don't think, oh, there's some behavior that I find objectionable that has causes and conditions and so on, right? And then address the behavior. What we tend to do is address the child. It's true with children. It's also true with, it's equally as true with adults and politicians and so on. We see a person engaging in objectionable behavior, and we think that makes them a bad person. We don't think that they're engaging in behavior that has causes and conditions, and they're actually trying to be happy and just doing a rubbish job at it. In fact, perhaps people trying to be happy are causing themselves more difficulty. So it's really helpful to start to differentiate this out, right? To think, well, it's not the child, it's the child's behavior. It's not the person's behavior. It's not me, it's things I've done. It's actions I've done. It's things I've thought, memories I've had even, or have. These are not me. These are something that kind of happens to me, right? And in the past, you can explain the behavior that didn't turn out well because I was just trying to be happy and I had it all messed up, And I really thought, if you trace it back to your younger years, if you had teenage years like mine, I can very clearly point to a lot of times where, I just thought that the solution to, the motivation for my actions was that I should just get everything I want, and go after that, right? At the expense of others even. And that's a mistaken idea, of course, of what causes happiness, because you lose all the people who you put aside along the way and discover that actually perhaps being nice to people would have been a better idea. So there you have it. This idea of being able to separate a person from their actions, particularly yourself when we're talking about guilt. So I've said or done something that I think was, what's the word? Didn't turn out well. Let's call it destructive, right? And now I've taken that result and these things and I've kind of fused them onto, and I consider them part of me. And then I think, oh, what's wrong with me? And the answer is nothing. What's wrong is that I had a mistaken idea at that moment about what would sort of make me happy, what would improve my lot in life. Is that okay? How are we doing? Just a thumbs up will be okay, I guess. Oh yeah, you can type is good. That's helpful for me. If you're watching the replay, you can maybe type me an angry email. Okay. Oh, thanks, Claire. Okay, good. All right. And of course, it comes back to this idea again. You think about it yesterday, is you've got these hedonic appearing as genuine. So I'm seeing, especially my younger years, for me, certainly before I knew any of this stuff, that I thought that the solution, and I think, and a lot of people, I would argue, perhaps go through their whole lives, even become presidents of large, powerful countries, believing that that's happiness, is getting these is hedonic. The genuine happiness is kind of off the table, not even occurred to them. And so then that's just what they do. They make perfect sense. They're just trying to be happy, right? And they don't believe that it's, that there's any other way. And I meet people like this, and like I say, you see them on the news a lot. And so this is a real problem. But it's what I'm getting at is it's also very explainable. You see this behavior that might be kind of reprehensible to you, but the behavior is quite explainable. A child's tantrum, that behavior is very explainable, especially if you have someone, I'm married to an expert in early childhood development. And so when I can do all this, see a child tantruming and go, and think, oh, what a bad child, and then unravel that very quickly. Go, oh yeah, the child's in distress actually. I wonder what's wrong. Versus my wife, who looks at it and knows exactly what's going on and what's wrong, and may or may not even be able to get in and help. So what I'm sort of getting at, I guess, to some degree, is that nobody really teaches us this stuff in our culture. So what I'm trying to get with today is just a kind of short presentation. I can't go into a lot of details, but I do want to get these mechanics across. It's something we go into more detail with in the in the online programs that I run and this sort of stuff. So get in touch with me if you're interested in that. But hopefully we'll get through some stuff today. Okay. I've already been through this. We tend to see behavior we find objectionable, and then we see a bad person. Right? The bad person isn't there. That's coming from my side. There is objectionable behavior for sure, but I'm sort of just very conveniently fusing all that into one bad person, right? And let's be clear, if you have a bad person, I mean, like if you have a child throwing a tantrum and it's a bad child, he or she is a bad child, there's nothing you can do, right? It's a bad child. So just give up, right? I mean, really, same with people. Just give up on bad people. However, if you have people whose reprehensible or annoying or irritating behavior has causes and conditions that make perfect sense, well, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Because then you find out what the causes are and see if you can play around with it and change the conditions and so on for that behavior to change, right? Ta-da! Then there you have it. There's actually something that can be done and is actually worth doing. But the second we think that a person is fundamentally bad, and that includes yourself, right? In fact, in terms of guilt, that's really what we're talking about. Somehow I think there's something wrong with me. I am a, quote, bad person. Then improvement change is off the table, actually. And once people think, this is the biggest, seriously, in my observations and dealing with people, I guess pretty much the biggest obstacle I come across to people improving their mental health, their well-being, is that they don't think they can. And it's surprisingly common. No, this is how I am. I'm stuck with this. It's biology, or it's just the way I am, and this sort of stuff. It's not true. So, we see a behavior we find objectionable, but then we just decide it's a bad person instead of bad behavior. We don't think, oh, there's a person trying to be happy and getting it wrong. And when I mean a person, I mean everyone. I mean Mao Zedong, I mean Hitler, I mean Stalin, all these people, right? Trying to be happy, doing a really rubbish job of it for a lot of other people. But that was fundamentally what they were after. And as I've already mentioned, it's something we do to ourselves with really potentially catastrophic outcomes, actually. Okay, so there you have it for now. Guilt. Is that okay? Is there any objections? What's going on over on Facebook? Can't see it. Objections, hallelujahs, anything? No? All right, I hope no one watching the replay is banging their keyboard in frustration because they really want to argue with me. So let's move on. That's okay. Let's have a look at regret. Okay. So regret, it said before, a type of sadness or sorrow about something you wish hadn't happened, right? This is often something that you wish you had or hadn't done as well, right? I read some research on this yesterday out of curiosity, differences between regret and guilt. And guilt almost always involved other people, whereas regret not necessarily. Regret would tend to be about an action that I did or didn't take. And it might not be in relation to another person. It might be a job I refused or turned down, or a move I didn't make to another city. These were sort of things that showed up as regret. And so ideally, regret, say in those examples I just gave, would lead to problem solving and forward planning for next time. This is where a lot of what we're talking about here is when you're talking about guilt and regret. Let's just pause for a moment. When you're talking about guilt and regret, you're inevitably talking about something that's previously happened to you or something that you've previously done and so on, right? Because feeling guilt about something that's happened, it's not likely you feel guilt about something that's going to happen, although that's not impossible. Same with regret. In general, where they become debilitating is when we remember having done these things or not done these things, and that causes us the problem. Okay. And when we have, so what happens then is that it's not so much about the thing that you did or didn't do in the past, right? Because that's sort of done. It's about your relationship with that action and with that memory. This is really important. And actually, there's a lot of research that bears this out in this field, but also in post-traumatic stress, that it's not the incidents themselves, but it's our relationships with the memories of those incidents, and that's where we need to get, it's like, what causes guilt? So some people don't feel guilty even though they've done some crazy stuff, or regret even, then other people do really small things and kind of paralyzed by regret and guilt. And because it's not about the actual actions themselves, it's about your relationship with those memories, with those actions. Okay. So when we say here on the slide that I've got up now, we say, well, ideally regret would lead to problem solving and forward planning. And that's exactly what it would do. It would be thinking, well, what would I do next time? What went wrong, what went right, and so on. But mostly we struggle to do that because we get caught up in the memory and relive it. Yeah. And that's what happens. And it leads to guilt, rumination, and depression, and so on. Okay. So what becomes, all right, so what we have here then is I'm presenting basically something that maybe we've done in the past that we think was unfortunate, or that happened in the past, I don't know. And for whatever reason, I feel some responsibility for it. Yeah, it can be huge, it can be not so big, doesn't matter. What matters is how much, how much difficulty it causes me. So, and I'm saying there are actually kind of a healthy or less healthy ways of dealing with it. One is guilt. One is to take that and kind of fuse it onto as being, my part of me, a part of my makeup as a person. I start to feel like I'm a bad person, feel guilty about it, right? Rather than, I think, damn, I wish that hadn't happened, or I wish I hadn't done that. And bouncing forward from that, thinking, well, what would I do next time? Is there something I could do to make it right? Rather than being and problem solving. And you'll find in a lot of sort of mental health literature, or certainly research, that's it's a common dividing line between what we call adaptive and maladaptive, between healthy or unhealthy responses, is problem solving versus a lack of problem solving. And so you can see here when something's happened in the past, and I just get mired down into like, poor me, it's just something wrong with me, I did that, it's part of my being as a person. versus, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I can see why I did it. It was dumb, it was a mistake, or whatever. Or what did we say yesterday? That a misinterpretation, right? Then that's entirely different. You can go back and rectify it to some degree. To if you wronged somebody else, explain yourself. Whoops. But certainly you can at least bounce forward from it, thinking, well, if that sort of thing happens again, I'm going to be more careful. But it does bring up the question: what sort of mediates? What sort of things change something from being an unhealthy to a healthy version of memory in this case, right? So here we go. I actually borrowed some of these slides and played around with them for the from the Beyond Mindfulness Method program, which some of you actually are in on, who are here right now. So I'm just going to introduce a new term, rumination. Basically, it fundamentally, it just means sort of unsolicited memories of things that have happened in the past. Sort of mulling them over, having them come up and sort of rehash them. And there's been a lot of research. This is part of my PhD. This is why I sort of take a special interest in it. A lot of research into rumination links it very, very heavily with symptoms of anxiety and depression. Depression especially more so, but both. And so there's a lot of research done into that. Some even more clever research that started in the 90s and has not been given the sort of spotlight it should have, really, is that there are these two types of rumination. So when I've done something in the past, whether it's good or bad, doesn't matter. Let's say I've done something that's upset other people and myself, and then I get these intrusive memories of that come back, that I don't want. Here it is. This is what I was talking about. At that time, what's important is my relationship with those memories, is how I treat them. And so rumination actually is very clearly divided into two types. There's a type that's reflective. We call it reflective and brooding. And of these two types, it's only the brooding type that leads to symptomology, right? To sort of depression mostly, or at least symptoms of depression, okay? So then it becomes kind of curious, well, what sort of things would mediate that? Is there a way we could get out from brooding and into the more reflective type? So when these memories arise, even if they're kind of disturbing and annoying, what can prevent me from being pulled down by them and actually help me, problem solve and kind of bounce forward from them, if you like? And it's pretty clear that mindfulness, attention training will do that. Lower levels of trained mindfulness are more related to brooding. Higher levels are more related to the reflective type. Okay, so if I can just rearrange this slide a little bit and put it like this, here's what you've got. You've got things that you might feel guilty about or regret, that these memories are arising quickly in the past, and that's an important time when it happens. You can't stop it happening for the most part, but when it does happen, you can exercise some control and start to treat it as just as a memory and problem solve and try to learn from it and bounce forward. Or you can sort of start reliving it and having it just beat you down even more. Okay. And the thing that will mediate between the two is how much control you have over your attention, which is what mindfulness training does for you. Okay. So I had a little think about it. I read up and I decided for our purposes today, I would pull out those two and put these back in. So instead of having talking about them in terms of reflective and brooding, which is a really great way of talking about them, let's talk about these memories and so forth that come up as things that elicit or they bring about regret versus guilt. Yeah, and because again, what you have now is, I'll just add to that slide one last time. What you have now is your mindfulness training, that attention training, mediating, if you like, deciding or helping you shift those memories out from guilt-laden ones into the more helpful regret ones. It's still something you wish hadn't happened, but that's a powerful tool. wishing something hadn't happened. Because once you wish it hadn't happened, ideally you start to think about, what if I'm in that situation again? How can I avoid this regret in the future? They're logical ways to think, and there is a very clear way to help you with that, and that is through some mindfulness training, right? So how are we? I'm going to just pause for a moment there. Any questions, outbursts, hallelujahs are good about any of that? None? Okay. So you'll all pass the exam that's coming after this. Okay. Okay, please keep going, no worries. So there you have it, mindfulness training. And so just to kind of move on a bit, I guess, when I say move on, I just like to revisit something from yesterday, which is this idea again of meditation as being the cultivation of something. Yeah. And one of the things that you cultivate, right, is mindfulness. Okay. And mindfulness itself really just means to remember. Okay. So when, in fact, I'm going to go back, and now that if you think about it in this context, high levels of memory, right? There's all sorts of things that can happen. So here we go. I have an intrusive memory that arises from the past about something that I wish I hadn't done or said. And to be clear, when you get good at this, you can actually be something you wish you hadn't thought, right? High-end meditators, that's the sort of stuff you're working on. You've been at this for a while. You can, rather than sort of just try to restrain the things I say and do, I can actually go in and change the way I think about things, so that, which eliminates the possibility of saying and doing things I don't want to. But it's in that sequence. You get good at not doing things, sort of restraining physically, you get better at restraining verbally, and then you can talk about the mental. And so mindfulness, what I need to do is remember what's going on, right? Because what happens, I have this intrusive memory from the past, it arises, it captures my attention, we say. So my attention's captured, and I don't differentiate that memory from the actual event. I just sort of start to treat the memory of the event as the event, and I relive the whole thing. And it's traumatic and unpleasant, of course. What I need to do is remember a few things. Firstly, if I remember that it's just a memory and not the actual event, that can be helpful. If I remember that, the way to treat it and to think, well, rather than be mired down in this looking backward thing that already happened, right? Now I've got to remember that I could learn from this. Yeah, that happened. I thought that was a good idea at the time because I was mistaken, because I misinterpreted things. I didn't understand. So going forward, now that I do understand better, now that I have my motivation is sort of more in check than it was in relation to what causes happiness and well-being, for example. Now that I know that, I can use this and think, well, if this happens in the future, or if a similar situation happens again, I am going to try this. I'm going to try something else. It's helpful to even write these things down, to actually have plans. So it's about this remembering, is paying attention to what's going on and remembering what to do. And what you want to do when the intrusive thought arises and intrudes, what we want to do is make sure that you use that to spring off it, rather than have it pull you down into its orbit, right? You want to use that to actually bounce forward and think, well, actually, I could do better next time. You also have the option, remember, of thinking, well, I'm just going to suck it up and I'm going to try to repair that, and go back and try to fix whatever happened. And you can go back and just, own up to it. I thought it would seem like a good idea at the time, or something like this. This is not always an option. I'm aware of that. I'm just giving you some ideas. I have to talk very generally too, because of course, it's much easier when you talk to an individual and you can sort of work on some particular things for them, but I'm trying to give you some ideas to help more generally. Okay. So that's what this idea of being able to remember is so important. I've got to remember what the hell's going on for me. Oh, okay. That's what's happening. And here's how I'm going to use that. I'm going to turn it into problem solving for next time. I'm going to sort of immunize myself against doing something stupid in the future. by thinking it through. You know, that's it. Realistically, with that, you can actually flip. And here's what will mostly happen, because we will have the habit of falling into the brooding, guilty rumination, right? And so what the mindfulness will do is notice that and go, oh, this is brooding rumination. That's not very helpful, you know. And then you can just flip it up into the green zone, if you like, there on top. You can flip it up into this type of healthy regret that moves on and problem solves. And in amongst all of this, you also have to remember that although it's something you may have said or done, that does not make you a bad person, right? Because, you know, there are different ways of looking at it. I'd say there are no bad people, which makes it easy. There's also no good people either, of course. But in psychology, we call that an attribution error, when you attribute the wrong cause to something. You know, someone studies really hard and they do well in an exam, and you just say, oh, they're just smart, you know. And then I do well in an exam and I say, yeah, because I worked really hard, this sort of thing. It used to bug me as a musician. I get ranting now. It used to bug me as a musician, especially when I was younger, and people would say, oh, you're so talented to, you know, me and my bands and the people I was working with, you know. You say, well, you know, it might also be hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of hours I've spent practicing, but you know, you write it all off as, you know, there's my little bee in my bonnet. So, you know, we had a look at this, cultivating mindfulness, that is to say, memory. Why would you do that? All sorts of reasons. You want to make sure you're aware of genuine versus hedonic sources of happiness and choose the right ones. Got to get good at that. You want to be aware of your relationships with your memories, right, and past events and so on. Yep. And try to alter them and improve them. And you can turn your relationship with something quite traumatic into something quite useful. Not pleasant, I'm not saying that, but you know, certainly you see it, for example, in people who've had really traumatic things happen to them in the past, and they managed to turn that into, you know, activism to prevent it happening to others in the future. You know, it's not vindictive, it's actually supporting of some other people. You see, soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder, same thing. You're going in and trying to help other people who are in a similar situation that they were. So it's why, you know, to come back to this, it's why it's so important to understand the terminology, right? Understand what we're talking about. So, you know, in this case, you have to remember that in terms of genuine happiness, that the hedonic happiness actually looks like genuine. You know, we're not stupid. It's just that the appearance fools us, and we need to. The appearance fools us, and so you need to be mindful of. You need to remember that you might be misinterpreting. So this is where this mindfulness skill comes up again. I've just mentioned mindfulness as a skill which might help you catch brooding rumination, catch, you know, falling into the orbit of guilt, catching yourself that, and remembering what's happening. Oh, I know this. You know, I'm better off bouncing out of this and trying to problem solve my way through it. You know, think about how I can use this experience to maybe benefit myself or even other people. You know, so there are some ways through it, and it's mindfulness that does that. It's the same with these two types of happiness. It's the mindfulness that is going to catch you sort of focusing in on or being sucked into the hedonic happiness, expecting a genuine payoff, right? You need to notice that's happening, mindfulness, right? Attention, remembering, and being able to pull yourself out of that and refocusing your motivation as being towards genuine happiness, which usually involves trying to be helpful to others. That's, yeah, for another, oh, actually that's for tomorrow. We'll look into that. So that's where this slide sort of comes from that I presented yesterday, that when you're looking at causes, you're trying to cultivate causes of genuine happiness, and you're certainly trying to eliminate obstacles, which is often, you know, poor interpretations, misinterpretations, or mistakes around happiness, around regret and guilt, and also around empathy and compassion, which is a knockout killer thing we really need to discuss, especially if you're in a caring situation, professionally or personally. Okay. So to come back to this, what I said at the beginning is I hoped, my plan is in these 3 sessions, and I'm trying to keep them short because it's a busy time here for everyone, that you can learn how to interrupt some underlying causes of stress, right? Not just mess around with, symptom level stuff like just stress reduction. I mean, like I said in this one of my posts, I'm like, stress reduction, stress management is a very, very low bar to set, I think. Why not stress incorporation, or stress elimination even, maybe. So to start pulling it out from the root, what causes it. And that's what we're trying to work on. And a fundamental way of doing that is the mindfulness training. Of course, having that attention training. But even if you've got the mindfulness training, the more you understand about what's happening to you, right, the better, whether it's in terms of happiness, in terms of rumination, in terms of empathy, compassion, as we'll see tomorrow. So that's how these things all come together. And so I'm hoping you at least have some idea of how you can interrupt these causes of stress, right? And of course, there are two ways. You can drown it out. We can try to figure it out. They both have a place, I mentioned yesterday. But when it comes to escapism versus tackling it head on, then I would say, if you're up for it, then try to prioritize tackling it head on. So there it is. That's my guilt and regret presentation for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 to have a look at empathy and compassion, which is just critical. If this is many of you already know me quite well, which is great. It's nice to see you. There's a lot of people watching back, I know, in your own time, which is great. Underneath this in YouTube, there's some comments, so you can find ways to get in touch with me. If you do want some support, there's a Facebook group, there's this free guide that I've put out there that gives you some tools to help you with some relaxation cues and techniques. We can have a look and see if you think if the Beyond Mindfulness Method training program might be helpful for you, and get in touch with all that. So, yeah, I just want to be clear. I said yesterday, this stuff works, but you really do, if you're looking for a quick fix, it doesn't. You need some time and effort. You also need some support to keep your enthusiasm up, which is sort of my job, or whoever you're working with. And you need a bit of time. Okay, so with that said, are there any doubts, questions, objections? Hallelujahs. Nothing? Go over on Facebook. Okay. Yep. So starting next year, I'll have some places available. There's a hallelujah. Thanks, Claire. So we do put, I have this call. I've sort of skipped over it today just because I'm about to go away for a little while. But certainly they'll have a calendar and people are booking sort of just 30-minute sessions, primarily to give some strategies, but also to see if be a good fit for that program. So please do get in touch with me and we'll sort something out for early next year. No worries. That goes for everyone watching. Early in the new year, if you've decided that you would like to get this, really get on top of this, then please do get in touch and we'll see if there's something I might be able to do for you, or at least a direction I might be able to point you where you find something helpful. If maybe this approach doesn't work for you, which it doesn't work for everyone. To be honest, what that usually means is people aren't willing to put in the work in this, but that's okay. That's just me. All right. Well, if there's none, then that's I got it in under an hour. So we'll see how we go tomorrow when we'll be looking at this empathy, compassion idea, because I hear this, compassion fatigue thing all the time, which is, just devastating the healthcare industry with burnout, and it's just not necessary. So I'm gonna have a go at that. All right. So come along again tomorrow, 9 o'clock. I will stream it through that Performing Under Pressure Facebook group, but it's better if you're here in the Zoom meeting because then I can see all your comments. Okay. So thanks for that. See you tomorrow, one way or another, and good luck with it. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming. See you soon.